Clara was 35 when she married Edward, a man of composure, generosity, and presence that felt reliable. He wasn't romantic in the traditional sense, but he was stable, and after years of emotional highs and lows, stability had sounded like love. Their life together began in a large, quiet house perched on a hill just outside the city. It was beautiful, spacious, filled with light, and completely still. Edward traveled often for work. Clara stayed behind, waiting longer each time for his return, her days growing slower, her silence heavier. She had never planned to become lonely. But loneliness crept in quietly. It settled into the walls, filled the pauses between phone calls, and wrapped itself around evenings where she ate alone at a table set for two. The only other person in the house was Liam, Edward's 20-year-old son from his previous marriage. He was quiet, polite, and distant, present without intrusion. At first, their conversations were limited to greetings and necessary exchanges. But routine has a way of softening barriers. They started to talk more. Simple things. Books, food, music. Shared silences became less awkward, their interactions more familiar. Clara noticed the way Liam moved around the house, not entitled or careless, but gentle, aware. He noticed her too, how she made tea for two even when no one else joined her, how she lingered by the window a little too long. It wasn't attraction. Not then. It was recognition, two people living in emotional shadows, learning the shape of each other's silence. Clara found herself looking forward to their conversations. They never crossed lines, never said anything they couldn't repeat. But there was a growing ease, an emotional availability she hadn't felt in her marriage. Edward's calls grew shorter. His return dates shifted. Clara stopped asking when he'd be back. Her world shrank to the rhythm of quiet companionship with someone who, unintentionally, had filled a space she hadn't acknowledged was empty. One afternoon, while tending to the garden, Clara strained her back. She dismissed the pain at first, until it tightened and refused to fade. Liam noticed. He offered help. She declined, not wanting to blur what already felt fragile. But as the pain worsened, she relented. Liam fetched balm and asked if she was certain. She nodded once, quietly. His hands were firm but careful, almost detached. The moment passed in silence, but it left something behind, an awareness neither could fully name. Clara lay awake that night, her thoughts spiraling. There had been no impropriety. But something had shifted. Not because of what Liam did, but because of what she felt. It wasn't lust. It wasn't love. It was need, raw, unspoken, desperate for connection. For warmth. For acknowledgement. She wasn't drawn to Liam as a man. She was drawn to what he represented, a presence that didn't require explanation, a closeness that hadn't demanded performance. By morning, nothing had changed, yet everything felt different. Clara greeted Liam as she always did, her voice steady. He smiled back, unchanged. But inside, she knew she was standing at the edge of something quietly dangerous, not because she wanted to fall, but because she had already leaned too far. Edward returned 2 days earlier than expected. Clara heard the key in the lock and felt her chest tighten. His hug was brief, his questions few. Liam greeted him politely, then slipped away. Edward watched the way Clara's eyes followed Liam down the hallway. He said nothing, but his silence carried weight. Over dinner, words felt like effort. Edward barely ate. Liam said little. Clara tried to hold things together with small talk, but the spaces between their sentences felt louder than the words themselves. Later that night, Edward stood by the window, arms crossed. Without turning around, he asked, "Is there something you're not telling me?" Clara replied softly, "No." He didn't argue. He just nodded once, like he had expected a lie but hoped for something else. Then he asked a second question, lower, heavier. "Are you happy?" She stared at him, caught off guard. She couldn't say yes, and she wasn't ready to say no. All she could manage was, "I don't know." The next morning, Liam was gone. A short note left on the desk read, "I think it's better if I stay with my mom for a while." No accusations, no blame. Just space. Clara folded the note and felt the finality of it settle into her hands. He wasn't running. He was stepping away, from confusion, from discomfort, from something neither of them had asked for, yet somehow created. Edward didn't bring it up. He just moved around her with a quiet precision that felt colder than silence. Clara tried to write again, tried to explain what she didn't fully understand. But everything sounded like an excuse. She hadn't crossed a physical line. But emotionally, she'd leaned on someone she shouldn't have. That betrayal, soft, invisible, and unintentional, was somehow harder to forgive. Days passed. Clara stopped waiting for conversations that weren't coming. She started journaling. Short entries at first. Then paragraphs. Then pages. She walked more, talked less. The garden began to look like itself again. Edward eventually spoke. One morning, over coffee, he said, "I think we both lost sight of what this was supposed to be." Clara nodded. There was no anger, only exhaustion. He didn't suggest fixing things. He simply said, "You need to find yourself. I need to let you." She moved out a week later. A small cottage not far from town, filled with light and quiet. She volunteered at a local art center. Painted again. Not for sale, just for peace. One day, she received a letter from Liam. It wasn't long. He thanked her for the honesty, for the boundaries, for not pretending. He said he was learning, too. That he held no bitterness, only understanding. Clara read the letter twice, then tucked it away. She made tea, sat by the window, and looked out at the trees swaying in the breeze. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel the need to explain herself to anyone. She had been lost in search of connection and ended up finding herself in the aftermath. It wasn't a happy ending. But it was real. And that was enough.